My name is Stephanie Witt, and this is Suzanne McCorkle, and we're here at Boise State University. We hope to talk to you a little bit today about how to make effective presentations in class and how to work the pedagogy of using public speaking and effective PowerPoint presentations a part of your public administration and political science classes. I'm going to turn the floor over here to Suzanne McCorkle, who's going to lead you through her presentation.
Thanks, Stephanie. What I found with my classes is that when I don't talk about visual aids, a lot of times students will use too many visual aids or the wrong visual aids, and it really hurts their presentation. So what I would like to do is to talk about how do we create the right expectations for students as far as what we want with visual aids, and then give them the knowledge they need so they can build better visual aids, and in particular, better PowerPoint presentations. So what do we need to talk to students about? What I do is at the beginning of the semester, I will give them a presentation much like this that sets up my expectations, and then I build my grading matrix to include some of the items that are the principles of how to build better PowerPoint presentations. So when we think about visual aid basics, there's really 5 things that students need to know. They need to know that the visual aid needs to support but not replace the actual message that they're saying. So they shouldn't be reading every slide that they have to the audience. If they're going to do that, they might as well have just mailed it in to everyone and we could all watch it privately in our homes. So the purpose of visual aids is to reinforce the rest of the message. Another thing that the visual aid should do is they should add interest to the verbal message. So the visual aid should add some color, or should add some details, or in some other way be interesting. Next, the visual aid should be appropriate in its design and its color. And we'll talk a little bit about design and color as we go through this presentation. So the slide that you have on the screen talks about the 5 visual aid basics. So the next question we have is, this is a pretty boring slide. It just has a list of 5 things that I talked about. So how could we make this particular slide better? What do you think?
Well, I would check to make sure that the words are big enough to be seen by everybody in the room. Depending on the projector, that can really impact how well people can see. And oftentimes when I'm speaking, I get so carried away I forget to go back in the back and see what that slide looks like from the back.
Great.
There aren't a lot of colors going on here. We could use some other colors. What do you think?
Well, I think those are all really good suggestions. Also, the words themselves aren't very interesting. So maybe there's some way that we could change the words just a little bit to see if we could make them better. So let's see what we could do if we would do something like that. So maybe what we would do is we would change them into something we call 5 laws, and we would make them shorter with more interesting almost headlines that I would then talk about and give the same content, but what the audience is looking at while I'm talking about these 5 basic principles would be a little bit more interesting. So let's take a look at some of these principles maybe in a little bit more detail.
Okay.
So when we think about visual aids, Leonardo da Vinci really had the right idea when he said that what we really want is simplicity. And if you think about his Mona Lisa, it's just these little wisps of paint on a canvas that are so thin and so delicate that it's a miracle almost.
Yes.
And we want to do the same thing with our visual aids. We want to be just enough, but not too much. So how do we do that? Well, we have to think, are we old school or new school?
Yeah.
If we're old school, we're using things like posters. If we're using posters, we need to make sure that they still meet all the basic principles. They're big enough. We have one idea per frame instead of trying to cram everything into one item. When we're using the poster, we need to know if I have more than one, what am I going to do with the first one when I want to show the second one?
Good point.
I don't want to be standing there with it in my hand, not knowing where to put it. When am I going to reveal it? Should I cover it until that magic moment in the speech when I want people to be looking at it? And just all of those kind of mechanics.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't want to set my posters in the chalk tray at the back of the room.
Yes.
Because nobody can see it. And because it's vertical, when I put my visual aids on the chalk tray, they're going to want to leap off onto the floor.
Yes.
At the most inconvenient moment during my speech. So all other things that are old school are just using a film or a video. And films and videos are great, but unless I have the sophistication to use my computer and make a small clip out of them, I have all the trouble of finding the right moment in it, as well as wanting to make sure I'm competent at the particular technologies.
Yes.
Same thing with audio clips. You know, sometimes it's hard to find just the right space that I want to use, and to make sure that it's something that everybody can actually hear in the room, and that all of my equipment is going to be working properly.
Now, a lot of modern presentation softwares will allow you to add an audio or video clip, but one thing I've noticed is that not all presentation arenas are set up for audio or for video, and so knowing ahead of time whether they have the capacity to allow you to jump to something where the audio is important, you need to know that ahead of time.
Exactly, because when I'm sitting in my office preparing the presentation, I can play a clip on my computer through my computer speakers. It'll sound just fine to me, but they may not sound the same in a room with 40 people in it.
Yes.
I need to be able to hook up to some sort of larger sound equipment.
Right.
So the last two old school things we'll talk about are demonstrations and small objects. So demonstrations are when I'm actually manipulating something to show how it works.
Okay.
And demonstrations are fine as long as I can actually do the thing that I'm trying to do in the room in front of the people at the time. You'd be surprised how hard it is to get the cap off of a bottle in front of 40 people. So anything that's a demonstration needs to be very carefully practiced so I can control how long it takes, and that I can actually do the things I'm intending to do safely in front of the people that are in the room at the time.
Okay.
And then there are small objects or that I might want to hand out to people. Small objects are fine, but anything I hand around in the room, if there are more than 2 or 3 people, when I first hand it out, the first 2 or 3 people will have it when I'm talking about it, and everyone else will have it later.
Yes.
When I've moved on to another subject, and sometimes that's problematic. So the new school would be to use PowerPoint or some other software that does presentations and using embedded video or audio. And PowerPoint has its own problems, and that's what we're going to address next. So we think about visual aids, what's the state of the art today? Really bad PowerPoint presentations. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I think part of it is that people are enamored of all of the templates and the designs and the flying things in and out, and that we can spend a lot of time on the composition of the slide itself that really the audience doesn't care about, or it may make the slide worse.
Yes.
I was at a presentation once, and the speaker shared that he'd spent about 5-6 hours creating this one slide, and things were flying in and they were rotating and they were doing all sorts of things, and it really was a very wonderful slide. Unfortunately, the print was too small for anyone in the room to read it.
Yes.
So all of that time really was kind of wasted.
Right.
Yeah. So what we want to do then is to avoid the traps that are inherent in PowerPoint. And the first one is using PowerPoint or other presentation just like a giant note card. So this is where everything I'm going to say is on the slides, and you get to see all of it all at the same time.
Yes.
So there's nothing wrong with the giant note card method inherently, but if I use it, they need to be really good giant note cards.
Yes.
And I should at least time them so you don't see everything all at once and there's some mystery about what the next point will be. So my next point then on the things that we should avoid in our presentations is using a template that really doesn't benefit me.
Right.
So what have you noticed about templates in the past, those automatic ones that people use that you might not have appreciated as much?
Well, sometimes they take up a great deal of the screen so that whatever it is you're trying to show people becomes very small.
Exactly. So the way the templates are made, sometimes they'll take up the whole left side, the whole right side, the top half, the bottom half, or have something in the background that obscures the photo that you're trying to show. And it tends to use what I consider to be the premium space on a slide. And the premium space is the top third.
Yes.
That's what most people will be able to see. So if I'm using a template, I want it to either be at the bottom or not use up much of my space.
Right.
So we need to pick templates that are less
Yes.
and have less on them rather than have more on them. So the next problem that people have is they take their manuscript that they've carefully written
Yes.
out and they just kind of cut and paste it, all those words, onto their PowerPoint slides.
Right.
And so you'll have 50 slides, each of which that will have 100 words on it.
Yes. Hard to read, boring.
Mhm.
Why not just hand out the paper?
Exactly, exactly. So again, that's that less is more
Mhm.
principle. Now there's an exception to that. And the exception to that is if either the speaker or the audience are in different first languages.
Okay.
So if I have an accent
Mhm.
or a dialect that's difficult for the audience to understand, I might actually put more on my slides. Maybe
Okay.
not the whole manuscript,
Mhm.
but more of my keywords, a little bit more, so that if people can't quite understand my dialect as I'm saying the words, they have a second chance to get my message.
That's a good point.
You know, that's really the one exception I think that we have to putting too much on a
Mhm.
particular slide. The next thing we can talk about with PowerPoint is that we have people that I call the back row dropouts. And the back row dropouts are sitting back there and they're thinking, if I could only see what was going on those slides, I might appreciate it. But I can't really see, you know, over everybody else's
Right,
heads.
right.
Because the content goes all the way down to the bottom of the slide. And so the people in the back row, they can't see because the print's too small, or the images are too small, or there's too much on the slide. They just drop out.
Yes.
Because clearly I haven't done my job to try to include them.
Right.
So we want to avoid those back row dropouts whenever we can. Another thing to talk about is that as I'm preparing my presentation, I often will really love what I see on my computer screen.
Yes.
But then I have to realize maybe that's not what the audience will see because it's projected.
Oh. And what are the kinds of things that happen between the computer screen and the projector?
Colors will shift.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Things might actually spread out a little bit, one way or another. I've been to lots of occasions where I get there and they have a little screen that, you know, it's kind of wavy,
Yes.
and things really look very different. And so if I have large images, I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a lot of small images, that might be a problem. But the color shift, I think, is the main thing.
Okay.
So, as you said before earlier, what I really need to do is I need to go to the room, if I can, that my presentation is in,
Yes.
and I need to project it and sit in the back row
Mm-hmm.
and see what it looks like.
I could see that this would be a potential problem if I have, for example, several bar graphs where the color differentiation among the bars is not particularly stark,
Mhm.
so that, you know, they're all a version of blue or something like that, and if the projector portrays the colors inadequately, then it's going to be really difficult to tell which one I'm talking about.
Exactly, exactly. Because the computer screen gives you this perfect resolution.
Yes.
And once we project that, it's going to change in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So what we want to do with our visual aids is we want them to be, you know, almost elegant,
Okay.
simple, bright,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of white space. And we hope that the visual aid also can tell a kind of a story. So let's say I'm giving a speech on protecting heritage sites.
Okay.
And I have two main points. I want to talk about it in parks, and I want to talk about it as it evolves when there's partnerships between public and private sector.
Okay.
So I could have this particular slide with my two main points on it as I talk about it. Or maybe in the background as I'm talking about it, I would just have some examples of the kind of things that people are doing. So in this case, it's with petroglyphs. So I might show some petroglyphs as I'm talking about inside of parks, you know, the kind of things that exist inside of parks. And then I might show another slide that shows some of the things that exist on private land,
Yes.
you know, and so that we might talk about how those partnerships might evolve. So how do we actually build the slides? Well, we need to build them keeping 4 principles in mind:
Okay.
color, balance, continuity, and connection. So
Okay.
just as we look at this particular slide, you know, with the principles of color, balance, continuity, and connection, what do you see?
Well, I see lots of different colors,
Mhm.
some bold, some not, some italics, different
Mhm.
fonts. You have several different things going on there.
All right. So there's not much balance, there's not much continuity, they're really not connected in any particular
Mhm.
way, and as we'll discover in a moment, some of the colors are wrong. What we want to do then is say, what are we striving for when we're looking at each of these points? So when we think about color, we need bright colors,
Mm-hmm.
we need colors that have contrast, And we need to try to avoid the colors that people have with color blindness.
Oh.
So no reds and no greens, because that's all going to be shades of gray to at least some of the people in the average audience. So with balance, what we're thinking about is how does the content fit on the space of the slide as far as how the eye likes to perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
So the eye likes things to be a little bit balanced in the top part.
Yes.
The eye tends to scan in European American culture from left to right.
Yes.
And so we want to put things so that they're balanced on the slide so that it's easy to look at.
Okay.
And you can tell a slide when you look at it that just somehow it seems wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the picture's in the wrong place or the words are somehow not balanced out on the screen. Continuity means that from slide to slide we have some connecting element. Now that's probably the template.
Yes.
That's in the background, but it could be a font.
Okay.
It could be any one of a number of things, but there's something that as we go from slide to slide, the viewer has a sense of direction.
Okay.
So let's take a look at these 4 elements on some slides, and we're actually going to play Fix the Slide and say what's wrong with this slide.
Wow. Well, first of all, there's an awful lot on there, and it would take me most of the time that you would be talking to read through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a very interesting color, and I'm not sure. What do you see?
What do you think about that shadow that's at the top there? Does that really add anything to the
No,
slide?
I think it's just making it harder to read, actually.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I see those shadowing effects, it takes me quite a while to look at them and figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever someone is looking at the slide and concentrating and trying to decode it, they're really not listening
Right.
to me anymore. So whatever I've said during that period of time is really lost. So with this slide, the heading, shadowing's not so good. There's just too many points on it.
Mm-hmm.
We want to get back to that principle of one idea per slide.
Okay.
So this might wind up being 6 or 7 slides with maybe a graph of the index or some other things that I would then talk about this particular content as I'm showing the graph or as I'm showing something else, rather than giving you all of the content
That makes sense.
on the particular slide. What about this next slide? What do you see?
The background is horrible, and I like lentil soup, but I don't want to see it on the background of the slide.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot. You have the different colors. The words black, red, and green are a little fuzzy, and the quote at the bottom is hard to read against that background.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So if we were going to fix this slide, what might we do?
Well, why not a picture of the flag itself?
Exactly.
And then you could talk about the components as we're looking at the flag.
Mm-hmm. So when we look at this slide, these are actually my speaking notes.
Yes.
And then maybe the visual aid is the flag itself. And
Perfect.
while the flag is there, I'm talking about what the colors mean and what they represent. And that would probably be much more engaging for the audience.
Absolutely.
What about this slide?
Well, let's see. The template line at the top is running right through the words, so that makes it a little harder to read.
Mm-hmm.
You've got different fonts. There's a lot of information here, and I'm not sure that the picture is in the right place relative to the text.
Mm-hmm. And to me, the picture even looks a little fuzzy.
Yes.
I like the idea of a picture. If we could use this picture in a way that wasn't fuzzy, it might be a good one to accompany some of this content as I used the content as my speaking notes and went through some of the other aspects of it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So this is the sort of thing where maybe a map of the Basque territory, as I talked about, the Basque people might be more engaging for the audience, and then the pictures or some other a chart about the industries,
Right.
those sorts of things might be much more engaging for the audience.
Yes.
How about the Afghan-Soviet war slide?
The Afghan who war? I have trouble seeing that word against the background. The white is also hard for me to read. The pictures are a great start, but they're too small and could maybe be one per slide, and then you could be reading the material from the Soviet losses as your speaking points.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So the color is one of those colorblind colors. Even for some people, even for the best of us, red on red's not much contrast.
Right.
The pictures are pretty small. I imagine most people in the audience would spend a couple of minutes trying to figure out what's going on in those 4 pictures. And so the other things that were being discussed would be not attended to during the talk. And what about this?
I don't think that the green goes with the photo very well.
Mm-hmm.
And why not just the photo?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's such an iconic picture that most people will know, oh, this is the Colosseum that's in Rome. And so the word Italy itself
Yes.
perhaps is redundant. So if we could get a picture that was crisp, fill the whole screen with the picture, we really maybe don't need those words. But we're moving in the right direction because it's simpler.
Yes.
It's one idea, and it provides a good interesting backdrop for the speaker to talk about whatever it is that they're talking about Italy. And how about the Hawaii Department of Transportation slide?
Well, this is better. It's simpler. The background is still not my favorite color, but I like that there are fewer words. I might suggest that rather than listing those things, that you click through some pictures of airports, harbors, and highways instead.
That would be very engaging for the audience. And again, the particular color that was chosen for the background is not particularly attractive. All right. So what about this last slide?
Well, I like the simplicity of it, and that's a beautiful photo. What do you think?
I think this is better. We could certainly fill the whole screen with this photo and then maybe superimpose the word Vietnam somewhere on the top where everyone in the audience would be able to see it. But again, this one definitely is meeting many of the principles that we've talked about. It's a simple picture. You can grasp the whole picture relatively quickly.
Yes.
And so it's not going to be detracting from the speaker's primary message. It's going to be supporting it.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about. So the last thing I want to talk about today with visual aids is that there's this equation that really sets you free when you're thinking about visual aids. And that is that there's 3 possible combinations. There are the visuals that everybody gets to see.
Yes.
And that's different than my speaking notes.
Right.
That only I see. And so my notes should be much more detailed and complicated that are just for me than the visual aids that the audience sees, even when I'm using the giant note card method.
Right.
And then the last thing is there are handouts that I can give to people to take away with them.
Yes.
So if I'm even dealing with a very complicated subject about statistical tables and data, I can give a relatively simple version of that on my visual aid with the takeaway for all the people that want to go through every statistical table and really look at it in detail. So I give just enough during the presentation, and then the handout has the rest of the data that everybody needs to see.
I think a common thing that speakers do is to hand out the very presentation that they're showing on the screen, so then everyone in the room is looking at their handout as opposed to the screen.
Exactly. If I'm not adding anything to what I've just given you, why shouldn't people be looking ahead and going through everything? So when I use visual aids, I like to try to hit all 3 levels. Relatively simple slides that are engaging, that provide some support for what I'm saying, and are interesting. And then in my own notes, I have much more detail. I have the heart of the matter that I'm going to be speaking verbally. And then I tell people that at the end there are some handouts for them that either have the entire presentation in depth, if that's appropriate, or I might have copies of the data and the tables and other sorts of more detailed work, even a whole report that I've referred to that I might want them to have as a takeaway. And that way, people aren't, if I give it to them early, they're not reading through everything while I'm speaking.
Right.
Because I want them to be with me during the speech rather than off doing something else. So these are some ideas about PowerPoint presentations. Now, if people want more, we're happy to have you take a look at our forthcoming book called People Skills for Public Managers from M.E. Sharp, where we have a chapter on public speaking and PowerPoint presentations.